up, everybody? And this is the Thunder Channel on nootropics, on testosterone, on male performance. Subscribe to the channel if you're into that stuff. I wanted to quick mention again, we are still running the Torque 30% off special. I got about 130 bottles still left to sell, 30% off. Our loss is your gain. You can do that with the coupon code 30TORQUE at livecortex.com. All right, friends, so let's talk about making your libido great again. And though we will discuss TRT in this video, we're going to discuss other nuanced elements of making libido function great. But I wanted to mention that so from April 10th onward, we will have a full guide to getting on TRT. Everything you wanted to know, everything you need to know to start TRT. So this will be relevant to a lot of people that watch this past April 10th. Okay. So down to the technical details. I first want to say, in order to understand how to affect libido, you have to understand the system in its entirety. The most primary influential factors of libido for males are the following: testosterone, estrogen or estradiol, and to an extent, but somewhat lesser extent, neurosteroids like DHEA and pregnenolone, and then lastly, neurotransmitters, and specifically acetylcholine and dopamine. Now, this system is very complex. The spinal cord is involved, and it's sort of a systemic integrative control system of all these different hormone factors and neurotransmitter cascades. So, the system is very complex. My job is to look at it as a whole, and in this video, I'm going to kind of break down how to target each system to make your libido great again. But look, also all manner of things affect libido, ranging from too low testosterone to too low estrogen, to too high estrogen and too low levels of testosterone, to prolactin over the reference range, to the inhibition of dopamine receptors or dopamine signaling from medications that you may be taking, to not enough choline in your diet to adequately promote healthy levels of brain acetylcholine, which is somewhat of a critical neurotransmitter in libido, inadequate micronutrient intake, to medications that you might be taking that are preventing your testosterone from being 5-alpha reduced into dihydrotestosterone, to honestly other things, like hosts of other things as well. All right, so on to the tactical stuff. Okay, this is where you're gonna really want to pay attention. Firstly, statement, testosterone itself is the primary initial driver of male libido. Now, this isn't because testosterone binds directly to androgen receptors and then somehow that activates libido, because it's really DHT that has the most binding potential and action at the androgen receptors. But it's because testosterone triggers a range of downstream neuroendocrine functions that ultimately lead to libido, and not the least of which is the testosterone-estrogen ratio. And yes, by the way, I just implied that estrogen is, critical or partly responsible for male libido. In fact, there's plenty of studies out there that pretty conclusively show us that if we give male rats things like tamoxifen or otherwise estrogen reduction chemicals, that their libido suffers. They have less mounting and copulatory behavior and less interest in sex. So let's get back to this testosterone-estrogen ratio. Look, if you have high levels of testosterone, but you have low levels of serum estradiol, your libido is going to suffer. If you have high levels of testosterone and high levels of estrogen, your libido is going to suffer. I'm going to get to ranges and numbers here in a second. So the first and primary thing that any man needs to do in order to make their libido great again is to, on a general tone, get your testosterone levels high, but simultaneously balance out the levels of estrogen in this sort of androgen-estrogen ratio. Now the ratio, okay, into some of the specifics, seems to be different for different people, but there is a range. You can and should use a testosterone estrogen ratio calculator, which you can find by Googling, to understand, what your testosterone estrogen ratio is, and then as you manipulate those numbers moving forward, to continue checking up on it. For example, my libido as a 39-year-old guy that is on TRT but has my numbers dialed in is raging. It was pretty awesome before I got on TRT, but it's definitely better now. And my testosterone ratio as seen in this screenshot is 256.3. So what that means is that my testosterone is 27 or so times higher than my estrogen. This is an ideal ratio for me. My ideal testosterone levels in total test is 950 nanograms per deciliter, and my estrogen right now is sitting at 35 picograms per milliliter. So if you take my 35 picograms per milliliter in estradiol and multiply it by 27.14, it's the real number, 27 times higher is my testosterone, you basically get right around 950. Now, for most men, Okay, I'm going to try to make as blanket of a statement as possible. You're going to want a ratio of between 24 and 30 times higher testosterone than your estrogen or estradiol. All right, so that's like major point number one. Get your testosterone estrogen ratio in the right place. And there are so much more nuance, so please stick around. Look, there's 1,001 ways to manipulate that, but I can tell you one critically important thing. It's going to be a lot harder to do at a granular level if you're doing it naturally, right? Whereas if you're on TRT, it is a lot easier to dial in that ratio and your test to estrogen, ratio. Let's say you're not, okay? Let's say you're not on TRT. This is the first step in getting your libido sorted out. Number one, test your total testosterone. Number two, test your estradiol. Now let's say that your total testosterone is at 650 nanograms per deciliter and your estradiol is at 30 picograms per milliliter. This is a skewed test to estrogen ratio. Guys that are sitting in those ranges probably are having libido issues. And in this case, your total testosterone is only 11 times higher than your estradiol. Now, in order to reach adequate ranges in this particular situation, you're gonna have to take your testosterone levels from this 600, 650 mark to like 920, 930 nanograms per deciliter. Who the fuck is FaceTiming? And, in this particular case, because your estrogen is sitting at 30, you're going to have to keep it relatively the same. I mean, it could go up 5 picograms per milliliter. That's totally fine. Now, this is where natural things like icing your balls, red light therapy, a micronutrient-rich diet, as well as a macronutrient-balanced diet, sleeping 7 to 8 hours a night, dosing things like Fedosia agrestis and Tongat Ali, and administering zinc as a supplement come into play. And all the former strategies will raise your serum testosterone levels, assuming there's nothing else crazy that's wrong, which we're going to get to. And zinc acts as a mild aromatase inhibitor, which should allow you to manipulate to the best extent possible your estrogen numbers to get your test estrogen ratio in the right place. If you're trying to approach this naturally, then that would be the strategy to do. Execute every strategy under the sun, including some of the stuff that I just mentioned, to raise your total testosterone numbers, and use compounds like zinc. There's another compound called myomin, which is a mild aromatase inhibitor. You can find it on Amazon. Otherwise, you can use compounds like dindol methane, DIM, which help convert some of your, basically metabolize some of your estrogen out of your system. And that should get your sex drive back and make your libido great again. Let's just stop for a second and say that like all those strategies don't raise your testosterone levels. This is what you do in that particular case. You need to step back and understand how the testosterone system works. Brain, okay, starts from the brain, specifically the hypothalamus, kind of a hormone control center, secretes gonadotropin releasing hormone. A gonadotropin releasing hormone, or GnRH as we'll refer to it, is kind of a programmatic hormone, if you will, because it instructs the pituitary gland to make and signal follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, which then travel directly down to the testicles to make you make sperm and testosterone. If something is wrong with this process, so from the brain's point of view, the hypothalamus's point of view, or the pituitary gland's point of view, there's going to be an interruption in that signaling and you will not make as much testosterone as you should. Now, for a lot of guys, like, I don't know, aging can do this. Pituitary tumors is a big invader that causes problems of this nature. Otherwise, higher than the top level of the reference range levels of prolactin will do this, which, can come about in all variety of ways, or be caused by a lot of things. Prolactin secreting pituitary tumors would be one of those things, but also opioid receptor agonists block dopamine receptors and thus raise serum prolactin levels. This is why I strongly advise against the use of things like kratom. If you have particularly a prolactin issue, you're going to need to target the lowering of prolactin, which can either be done by the removal of the offending drugs that are raising prolactin, or if you absolutely need them to be in the mix, using D2 receptor agonists from the pharmaceutical industry like cabergoline or bromocriptine, which we're going to get to a little bit later. But either way, if you got high levels of prolactin, you're going to need to tend to that right away before you can go about balancing the testosterone and estrogen ratio. Even if you got on TRT, prolactin is still going to inhibit sexual function at the penile base vascular level. Okay, so let's say you understand all of that, right? I'm giving you every strategy possible to make your libido great again. And you can't raise, so your prolactin's in a reasonable place, but you can't raise your testosterone naturally with some of those other compounds like Fedosia and icing the testicles and red light therapy and sleeping well. You're doing all of that correct. Let's just say that. In this case, it's probably your age. You're probably 35 or older, or maybe you're slightly younger than that. At which point, and in which case you're going to want to consider testosterone replacement therapy. Now, even with TRT, your testosterone estrogen ratio still needs to be in a good place. Think of the word meticulous, and then we're going to circle back to this word several times in the ensuing parts of this video so that you understand that you need to execute a high degree of granularity in looking at your numbers to make your libido great again. Now, TRT, okay? Most clinics that prescribe testosterone to men prescribe doses that are far too fucking high. That's usually in the 200 milligram, 210 milligram per week dose range. So what guys end up doing is ending up with supraphysiological levels of testosterone, call it 1100 nanograms per deciliter, and then also supraphysiological levels of E2 or estradiol, and let's call that 65 picograms per milliliter in this hypothetical. So back to the ratios, right? This is a skewed testosterone to estrogen ratio. You know, in this case, with 1100 total tests and 65 picograms per milliliter estradiol, your testosterone ratio number, your testosterone is only 16 times higher than your estradiol. And again, you want it between 24 and 30 times higher. Probably the easiest way to address this for guys that are on TRT or thinking about going on TRT, and also for those that aren't, just to sort of exemplify this point of ratios, is to take the dose of testosterone down. So from 200, you probably want to work your way down in somewhat slow increments, go down to 170, run that for a month, see where the numbers fall. Ultimately, you're probably going to end up somewhere around 150 milligrams a week. And let's say that 150 milligrams of testosterone cypionate per week takes you to a place where your total test is 900 nanograms per deciliter, but your serum estradiol only dropped 10 points down to 55 picograms per milliliter. This ratio, if you did the math, is still skewed. Your testosterone is still only about 16 times higher than your estradiol. You would need in this particular case, so like I wouldn't take the testosterone dose any lower, you need to lower your serum estrogen. The best way to do this, you know, in this particular case is to bring in an aromatase inhibiting compound. Most TRT clinics, most, not all, most offer aromatase inhibitors. The most predominant of them is a chemical called anastrozole, which is going to prevent some of your testosterone to converting to estrogen. And I'm not going to give you a particular dose for anastrozole because again, it's going to be different for different people. But the primary point I want to make to you is if you take your serum estrogen too low, it gets in the teens or something, that's going to mess with your libido too. It's got to be in a good range. But an ideal ratio for test to estrogen in this particular case where you've reduced your dose of testosterone and you're sitting at 900 nanograms per deciliter total test would be having your estrogen around 35 picograms per milliliter. So in this hypothetical, you'd want to move it down from 55 picograms per milliliter down to 35 picograms per milliliter. That is a good testosterone to estrogen ratio. And in this case, if you continue dosing that protocol, your libido is going to be great again. Getting the ratio in the right place. Now, again, assuming that prolactin isn't above the reference range, you're not taking medications that are causing prolactin to raise. Assuming you're on no medications that are blocking dopamine receptors or dopamine throughput or general dopamine signaling or anticholinergic and blocking choline receptors. Assuming all of that's in check, this should make your libido great again. But let's assume it doesn't. Let's assume that this doesn't work. You may need to sit at the ideal testosterone estrogen ratio, constantly supplying yourself with adequate levels of androgens while simultaneously managing estradiol for 3 to 6 months and possibly even more in order for your libido to come back. Now, and I can't tell you exactly how with the mechanisms for this, whether it has to do with androgen receptors or whether it has to do with the fact that estradiol sensitizes some serotonin receptors, or whether it has to do with the fact that testosterone is going to make you release more dopamine in certain regions of your brain that are critical for libido. It's probably a combination of all these things and potentially some other unknowns. But the major point is you may need to be at that ideal ratio for you for a considerable period of time. It's not like you get to the ideal ratio and that's a Friday, and then Saturday your libido is great again. That's just not, I mean, like a broken arm, bro. You break your arm, you put it in a cast, it fucking takes 2 months to heal. Like you're going to need to have the right things in place and then sustainably do them to make your libido great again. Beyond that, okay, let's say it gets your libido, you get your ratio great, prolactin isn't high, you're not taking any medications that are, you know, inhibiting dopamine or acetylcholine in your brain, and libido's still not where you need it to be. You may want to look at your neurosteroids like DHEA and pregnenolone, and although they aren't a massively substantial player in libido, they are a player if the numbers are skewed. Okay, so you're going to want to, I mean, the simplest way to approach this is to get your DHEA and your pregnenolone numbers tested. If either of them are low on the reference ranges, address them by taking DHEA and pregnenolone supplements. Now, if you do that, and you have your testosterone estrogen ratio in check, your prolactin levels are good and they're not high, you're not taking any medications that inhibit sexual function at the neurotransmitter level, or that give you excessive levels of serotonin, which is also inhibitory acutely to sexual function, then you should be able to make your libido great again. But there's more. Look, I learned a lot like over the past, call it 8 years in consulting men and optimizing libido, and that being like a major part of my life. Like, I love it. And I want to rattle off like some of those strategies that may be able to temporarily or maybe even just be the individual compound that helps you get your libido back, but with also giving you the sort of caveat or preface that these individual compounds or any individual compound is only going to help you get your libido back if you do not have large-scale hormonal problems or if your testosterone estrogen ratio is not skewed. If you have hormone ratio or otherwise hormone signaling problems that you need to tend to, there may be compounds that help you for 3 weeks, 2 weeks, a month, but they're not going to cure your libido problems. And some of you that have tried this for dopamine and that for acetylcholine have probably come to understand that it stops working. That's because you need to go back to either the hypothalamus or the pituitary brain gonadal axis and the modulation and optimization of sex hormones. Okay, so all that said, here are a couple things that I've learned. Number one, bromontane is a dopamine synthesis enzyme promoting compound, which is going to reduce your refractory period. It's going to raise dopamine concentrations. And for a lot of guys that don't have large scale hormonal problems, it's going to make your libido great. You're looking at 20 to 60 milligrams on the dose range of bromontane. Number two, prescription compounds like cabergoline or bromocriptine. And by the way, these are prescriptions, so I'm not suggesting that you procure those compounds in any other way other than a prescription. These compounds will agonize the dopamine D2 receptors. They're going to lower your serum prolactin levels as a byproduct of that. And for a lot of guys, that's going to aid in libido. Number three, PT141. This is a peptide that works on melanocortin receptors that for most people gives a short-lived and temporary increase in libido. But for men that are trying to aid their libido in the temporary period, you want to look into injecting PT141. What I came to find, and I did a video on this a long time ago and actually studied the compound, took it myself, came to understand what was happening fully, is through the melanocortin receptors, you're actually increasing, systemic or hypothalamus levels of dopamine. Number four, ensuring in any one of these situations, including hormonal optimization, that you have adequate levels of brain acetylcholine is going to help aid in keeping you having a healthy libido. Best way to do this is to take between 200 and 400 milligrams of either choline bitartrate per day or 40 to 100 milligrams of CDP choline per day. And then number five, mecunopurines. Mecunopurines is an interesting complex set of a bunch of different chemicals that sort of comprise this supplement, which is going to increase brain dopamine levels as a byproduct, reduce serum prolactin levels, albeit temporarily. It's dose dependent. And, again, if nothing else is wrong, mecunopurines is probably going to help restore that kind of brain libido visceral connection. Number six, okay, and this is not like a supplement or drug suggestion. If your doctor tells you that your testosterone levels are in range and you believe him, this means nothing. It's like, I've done some videos on ashwagandha and testosterone and other, testosterone raising strategies and like how testosterone is very critical and this ratio is important. I get guys commenting in the comment section, like without fucking fail, there's gonna be a guy, my testosterone levels are normal, bro. Like, bro, did you watch the fucking video? You need your androgens to be high and your estradiol to be in a certain ratio. But the doctor says my levels are normal. Look, bro, that tells me nothing and that tells you nothing. And you should have higher standards than to take some non-nuanced, this is normal explanation from a doctor and just run with it and say you're fine. Like telling me that, your doc says your testosterone levels are normal is like akin to telling me you had a fucking fruit smoothie and you took your dog Walter out for a walk this morning. Completely irrelevant. Look, if you're sitting at 500 nanograms per deciliter total test and your doctor goes, yeah, your numbers are normal, you're weaker than you could be, you're less cognitively agile than you could be, you recover a lot less well from workouts in the gym, and your libido is suffering, all this can be substantially better by raising that testosterone level. So for those guys that I know are thinking about going in the comments, I feel your fingers being hot already. My testosterone is normal. Brother, you need to get your testosterone in the 800 to 1,000 nanograms per deciliter range. and manage the testosterone to estradiol ratio and find, through calculating, the right testosterone to estrogen ratio for you, keeping the numbers between 24 and 30 times higher testosterone than estrogen. If you're doing that, assuming prolactin isn't high, there's no medications that are inhibiting dopamine receptors or inhibiting acetylcholine throughput in the brain or agonizing opioid receptors, you've got your neurosteroids in the right place, none of them are deficient for you, you're probably going to find that, you know, your 500 nanograms per deciliter total test normal from the doc was basically bullshit, and that you needed to optimize these numbers pretty specifically in order to make your libido great again. This video is going on however many minutes. Look, there are things that I'm sure I'm missing. There are nuances or certain situations in which maybe additional compounds need to be brought in, or otherwise biomarkers need to be reduced and back within range for a sustained period of time in order for your libido to come back. But I can't go on for an hour. If you need my help in any of these areas so that we can really dig deeper to figure out what is the biomarker that is skewing your libido, or what your ideal testosterone estrogen ratio needs to be, and whether or not you should go on TRT to resolve this, and advice on going on TRT and a host of things in between, you can hire me for that at livecortex.com. We've got ranging from, you know, simple interactions where I'll formulate protocols for you in a personalized email. So we now have personalized email consulting options, to actual calls where we follow up with protocols, to longer duration, like one-on-one programs, right? And you can check all that out in the description of this video, or hire me at livecortex.com. As I said in the beginning of this video, the Torque stack, we got, 125, 130 bottles left to sell at 30% off. We just got a new batch in, so I'm looking at the numbers like, dude, we can sell a lot of these for substantially cheap. So right now, our loss is your gain, 30% off of the Torque nootropic stack. And this is hardcore mental stimulation, a lot of hours of work. We're talking about 5 to 6 to 7 for some people, hours of good brain energy. Other than that, thank you so much for watching. I hope I've been as helpful as possible. Much more content to come soon, and I will talk to you on the next one.